Shattering Red, Chapter 3, Bots at Brunch. Vita parted her rouge-colored lips to call out again when a gagging gurgle came from the bathroom in the same direction as the effluence of the news. She followed the sound to find the doctor clinging to the toilet for dear life. He then rested his head on the seat while tears openly flowed down his cheeks, and he hiccuped a sad sigh that had his head back in the bowl. "Do I need to take you to a hospital?" Vita probed lightly and reached towards him, rubbing his sweaty back until he sat back up. Verity tried to take a deep breath, failed, and winced. "No," he exhaled sharply. "I have my programs running through what it could be." He wheezed. "I managed to bring home a trash can with plenty of samples to test." He waved a hand dismissively. "Have they done anything for you in the meantime?" she asked, watching as a mouse-sized contraption rolled up to the doctor, scanned him, and rolled back out of the bathroom. He leaned against the white wall, which radiated and recorded color and temperature at the different places his body touched, and bits of the wall bowed and extended to keep him supported comfortably. A beep sounded, and a cold, hard, female voice reported his current vitals. He looked over at Vita very pointedly. "Did you see the video?" she asked. "What video?" he asked, his brown cheeks turning red from whatever was fighting over his body. New sweat beaded over his short, black, curly hair, and his eyes fogged over. "I checked the security log from last night and noticed you had a visitor." "So?" Verity asked, gulping in air as a fan popped out of the wall to help him with his incoming vomitus. She withdrew the slightly damp carrying case from her top, wiped it on her pants, and extended it outwards, but was met by one of the doctor's robots already processing the offering. "It looks like Talbot tipped something extra into your meal after I left." Verity looked like he was going to make an argument until he saw the action for himself a few minutes later. He started to command new orders to his robots, which started worrying about him, moving in and out of the room. "Thank you for following protocol," he tossed out at Vita, peering over the see-through screen he was working on that was hovering at just the right spot for him to work without exerting extra effort. "This will—" He stopped speaking as his head tilted back and his mouth went slack. Before Vita could acknowledge the change, he began to foam at the mouth and shake uncontrollably. A rush of panic flooded her and she began to reach for her boss, but was met by iron-tough resistance. "Oh, darling!" The roughly human-shaped robot, wearing a frilly pink apron, hooted with mirth that matched a living human trying to defuse an uncomfortable situation. "Follow me. I've got some special chewables in the kitchen that I think you would adore." Its cold hand grabbed her own, leading her from Verity, who was currently surrounded by bots that already had his seizure under control and were monitoring his vitals. It didn't appear that Vita had any choice but to be dragged by the housekeeping bot away from the man in mortal peril, to the roomy, clean, off-white kitchen, where she could not impede the full knowledge of the doctor's medical database anymore. Various herbs grew in white pots around the kitchen, and there was a window above the sink with a little pillow that was clearly intended for some house pet. Vita was so busy looking into a part of her boss's life she had never witnessed that, at first, she missed the robot extending a very overweight, fluffy gray cat into her arms. The unexpected weight made her take a supportive step back before sitting at the maple-lined, white-boothed seats that wrapped around the kitchen table. The cat purred into her chest as the robot zipped around the room. Vita watched androids push a wheeled bed by the kitchen door, amazed by the thought that Verity was likely the only man whose immunoresponse was not condensed to his insides. "Gotta leave well enough alone. I know you're feeling a bit uncomfortable. Food will make that better." The machine let out a weird programmed hawing laugh before adding, "What would you like me to make, sugar?" "Coffee and eggs." Giving the bot an order was much easier than trying to get around it at the moment, and she had neglected breakfast, which made the easy meal tempting anyway. It gave her time to sit, process, and plan for what was going to happen next. She was at a complete loss as to what to do next. The bot busied itself around the kitchen, preparing the requested meal and more. She found her hands automatically running through the cat's thick fur in response to its luscious purrs of satisfaction. A quick glance at the cat's collar left Vita with a small grin on her face. "Moose" was very fitting. He lifted his paws and touched her lips with a drawn-out meow. Will Verithy make a recovery anytime soon? Vita asked the bot. The doctor may not recover at all. His systems are working on an antidote from the sample he brought home early this morning. It looks simple enough to synthesize, but it just takes a little time for the computers to process the information and make the concoction. Has the poison been narrowed down? The question that had been stewing silently at the base of her skull after watching the video finally allowed itself freedom, bringing a new pressure to her stomach. She set the cat on the bench next to her as the bot replied. No, it's been narrowed down to a specific family of plants, but the originator of the poison seems to be new. He has been stabilized. The information that we have about the poison family should be enough for us to succeed in bringing his health back. It is a good thing you have us to run the tests and do the numbers. Vita almost forgot that this was a machine and not an entity with thoughts and feelings. It glided across the kitchen and set steaming eggs, hash browns, and a pan-fried cricket rice vegetable dish down in front of her, almost releasing the pressure from her stomach like a clogged tube. She had waited too long to eat and had been too anxious and now needed to eat what was provided or throw up. With fork in hand, she started with the crickets, their nutty richness settling the need for protein. The housekeeping bot set down a glass of water and her mug of coffee, then sat down across from her at the table, resting its blank, screened face on its mechanical arms in the way a bored person would, as though waiting intently for a person to initiate conversation. Moose wobbled over to the machine and jumped on its head. Stretching out, he laid down with a pointed yawn. Vita sipped the water and pulled her phone out to see if Faust had responded yet. He had. What time do we ride? He had replied back about 15 minutes prior. This was not only an affirmative for them meeting in person, he seemed to pick right up on their long-practiced and never-used code. He would meet her, just outside of town, at a shared destination, with a similar get-out-of-town bag to what she had prepared. Faust's would undoubtedly be better packed, not that she was sure she needed it. She looked at the minimalist clock next to Moose's window and noticed it was almost 15 minutes to 8 o'clock. Having left her house almost 3 hours prior, coupled with leaving work just after midnight the night prior, she was really beginning to feel the sleep deprivation. She had already finished the first cup of coffee and asked the bot for a refill. It zoomed off to comply, the cat holding on tight. How soon can we meet? Vita tapped out to a fresh cup of coffee being poured. She requested sweetening agents, and the bot turned to grab them. The small robot that had removed the chip from her bathroom tapped on her knee. Looking down, she met the gaze of the bot, and it proffered the chip back to her in return. When she accepted this small bit of information, the bot turned and wheeled back out the door. She straightened back up and nearly knocked the cream and sugar from the housebot's iron-like grasp. Sorry, Vita apologized instinctively, to which the bot waved its hand around in an exaggerated 360-degree way to communicate no big deal. Vita then noticed the chip was not the same one that she had delivered and wondered what this could be. Can you read this file type? The bot examined the chip for a split second, then answered with an affirmative. May I? Vita asked. Entering guest mode, the bot stated, and the black screen of its face popped into life with the basic rules that governed the city that were required by law on any booting screen. She read it, as she did every time she logged in. She was as well trained as the rest of society. Laws of the land. 1. All humans are equal. 2. Food, water, shelter, education, and healthcare are given rights. 3. Facts are more important than opinions. 4. Murder is not tolerated except in self-defense. 5. Always treat the environment with the utmost respect. 6. Space exploration is prohibited. 7. Populations must be monitored and kept in control. 8. Think before you speak on important matters. 9. All people must give back to the community in some way. 10. Artificial intelligence is prohibited. Naturally, there were numerous other laws that affected society, but these were the core strengths that had built the city into what it was today. So far, the rules had worked really well if you believed the headlines. The robot's screen finished loading and popped open to a loud background of some cartoon human-fish hybrid. The neck of the bot extended for Vita to access it easily. She removed the file from its protective covering and pushed it into the proper slot, which was easy to see from up close. She tapped the screen to enlarge the first document and absorbed all she could. Tears ran down her face as she examined the data, so enwrapped in the new knowledge that she had missed the new message that buzzed across her tomo. Her biological family had all parted from the living. Her sister, Jessica, was the only reason she had begun work at the surrogacy center. The day the tragedy occurred, Vita hadn't been home. She had decided to venture off with some friends when she was in her mid-teens to have a fabulous day of exploring in the woods just outside the city. It turned into a 3-day backpacking nightmare where she carried the group. Her friends had not planned on being out that long when they asked her on the day hike, but one of her friends took the lead, boasting their famed hiking experience. All 5 of them got lost and continued to wander in hopes of finding the path. An expert trail guide, Faust, had been hired, along with a few other rescuers, by one of the other teens' parents, and found them. They had managed to get within 2 feet of the unpopular trail they had been following, but were unable to see it. The man didn't scold them, but gave them practical pointers, then set the kids in the right direction for home. He had asked Vita to stay behind and passed along the news that her parents and sister had been out on a walk and were tragically and accidentally killed by a new hybrid animal that had gotten spooked during its trial run and had run rampant through the city. The animal had not seen her family and crushed them, and a few other bystanders, against a wall. She hadn't believed him and had run the rest of the way home. A government representative and a few other officials had been waiting there to explain what had happened before quickly getting to the real reason they wanted to hand-deliver the news. Her sister had genetics that were as close to perfect as society could ask for. So it asked. The government official that shared the news with her said that centers wanted to use her sister's DNA to make a small army of surrogacy clones, and they spun the request as her sister being vital to the survival of the human race as a whole. The official had assured Vita that the clones would be brain dead and not conscious or feel a thing. He told her they would give her a job as a nurse at the center and that she could even work alongside her sister's clones to help the new population grow. All she heard was that she could get to see her sister again, and she started working towards that goal without a second thought. The man had shaken her hand and turned to leave. He had stopped in the doorway to tell her that she had been set up with some reparations from the guilty party. Then he continued on his way. His job had been fulfilled, and she was left in an empty house as a lone 13-year-old. The house, that had been filled with laughter and love just a few days before, had been left deathly quiet. She collapsed, sobbing for a few hours before the man who had led everyone else back from the trail to their rightful homes came to check on her. Faust quickly became one of her only true friends and her mentor. He went through the proper channels and, with her permission, adopted her so she didn't get stuck in the foster system. He had helped her through her darkest moments and guided her back into the light with countless adventures into the wilderness, which helped leave her reality behind. So it was terrible and troubling to learn that the surrogacy program had lied about the brain-dead part of their massive undertaking. The medical experts and scientists of the time had apparently never figured out how to properly disconnect the brain from the body, according to the research Verity had presented in the file. They knew it was possible from previous cases, but after all the natural and man-made disasters, very little medical knowledge had survived, and fewer people or medical professionals had. The Surrogacy Center had been established years after the disasters that had almost wiped out humanity shortly after the year 2059. According to Verity's note, the few doctors who were around had gotten greedy and saw the monetary potential in the surrogates. They had sold society the story that the only way to keep a healthy population free from genetic ailments presented from toxic reproductive problems introduced by man-made disasters was through the surrogacy program. The brain-dead part of the clone process was the only reason it had been morally and legislatively passed. Vita wondered how many times the cloned women had been raped and forced to do nothing but reproduce. Their mobility was cut off, so all they could do was stare blankly at the ceiling as society used them. The system had been in place for well over 100 years. It made her sick to her stomach. It was worse to know that she had personally been at her cloned sister's side for numerous years. bringing new life into the world thanks to her own permission to have her cloned. Her sister's DNA had been phased out years ago. There was an algorithm limiting how many times a clone type could reproduce so the population didn't encounter future genetic issues. But her model had birthed thousands. She wondered if her sister had been silently screaming for help while she had gone about assisting in her multiple torture sessions. Vita felt her food start to crawl back up her throat. She closed her eyes and swallowed hard, regathering her stomach, trying to let that thought go. She summed up the courage to continue. The document was a few pages long and had the feeling of a personal journal that was gearing up to the main point. The front page outlined 3 men through old newspaper clippings. The doctor had written dates and the article pages of the different news sources in scribbled bubbles on the side of the page. Arrows dashed frantically here and there across the page, trying to piece together a puzzle that had gone unnoticed for more than a century. All the pieces just may not exist anymore. There was an image of 3 men, all standing before a panel, receiving some kind of prize for medical achievement. In small print under the picture read, "From left to right, Richard Trent, Samson Malloy, Alec Klein." Richard Trent had been highlighted in yellow, with an arrow running to the text below the photo. Richard is the only one in the photo with surviving heirs. The only 2 had family, but they were all met with some kind of unfortunate accident later. See page 3 for details. Richard's survivors are few, but one is none other than Talbot Trent. He has a large seat of power in our government and heads our surrogacy center. I'm trying to figure out if he knows what his ancestors knew about the brainwave activity, or if he, like the rest of the community, was left in the dark. My findings true. I have tested them on multiple patients in secret. The tests are non-invasive and cause no pain. I am trying not to create mass panic. I created and used brainwave scanners to test different activities in the patient's brains. The claims of the 3 men above were false. Every patient experiences every trauma they are put through. They have thoughts, feelings, and emotions, but are trapped in a paralyzed body. A brain wave scanner was never used in the room to monitor the surrogates because the men argued the following: why fund something pointless? We already have done the testing. All that these men did was carefully paralyze the clone during the incubation process. I would like to, with permission and under scrutiny of the head human's right liaison, show proof of my findings. It would require a small internal surgery on a freshly birthed or birthing surrogate to prove that it is just a severed connection causing paralysis. I have done this on a few surrogates so far. It requires nanotech surgery and had great results. I'm afraid of how to approach and aid a person so abused, however, so I disconnected the tested drones. Due to these findings, I believe the surrogacy center should be shut down. I am currently looking for evidence that places Talbot Trent in the know. If he is, he should be prosecuted for the mistreatment of hundreds of thousands of people. Clones or not, they are and were people. My findings are that they felt everything. This is a formally undocumented, newly learned, but apparently old form of cruelty, and I think it is long overdue to set the record straight. Clones have been used not just as reproductive aid, but to further scientific research and find many cures to numerous illnesses and discomforts. This must cease to happen. All the data lines up. Talbot has been pushing to open another surrogacy center. In the last few weeks, he has written new legislation in hopes of letting the population increase the number of children allowed per household. The new center should be denied. The legislation he is trying to push should be tabled. A law has been left at 2 children per household for the past century, so that humans don't completely destroy the ecosystem like our ancestors did. He is pushing for this new center, which is something our society as a whole no longer needs, because we are thriving as is. I think personal gain and greed are the reasons behind this push. Humanity is mostly healthy. We're back to a stable population. We have cures for most illnesses. Our reproductive rights are no longer at risk due to the surrogates of the past. People can reproduce on their own again. If they can't due to sexual orientation or an issue that cannot be solved medically, they could find a healthy person willing to carry their child. There is no reason to make these women suffer constantly. She turned the page, which contained some video files of the doctor's recorded evidence, with scribbled reasonings that gave the previous page more context. The notes mentioned he had found out by complete accident. A person who had an ideal family member for the program wanted proof of no brain activity, so he had set up the machine and was dumbfounded. He sent her home with an apology and asked her please not to speak of this, and he vowed to make it his personal mission to figure out what was going on. He noted that he tested dozens more privately, then dug into the history of the surrogacy center. It had been difficult to find much of anything in the written past that led anywhere. Most of what had been documented was praise for the solution to the demise of the human population. It did seem as if a few articles among the archive had suggested murder, but their original articles had disappeared, and the papers with the written theories were flimsy at best. Maybe murder wasn't as flimsy as the doctor thought, Vita said aloud, looking at the blank-faced robot. A wavelength of light danced across its screen, followed by a dunk-dunk noise, to let the person in the room know the command was not understood. There was a name scribbled at the top of each page with elements from notes circled. Little arrows snaked from the circles to all point to the name, Talbot Trent. That name was familiar to Vita. She wasn't quite sure how, but she knew once her stress was down, it would be easy to recall. She closed her eyes and leaned back, trying to place the name with a face. Her tomo vibrated on the table, and she noticed 2 messages left by Faust. Give me an hour, give or take. The message was followed by the punctuated letter, K. Meet you about then. Thanks, she tapped out and sent. Vita popped the file out and placed it back into its protective case before tucking it into her backpack. You better make sure Verity gets better, Vita said in the most threatening tone of endearment towards the machine. Thank you for everything this morning. She gave the room a quick glance to make sure she left nothing behind before departing from the doctor's strange house, slipping onto the streets and feeling about as numb as a ghost must. That is the end of Chapter 3 of Shattering Red. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen. If you have liked what you heard so far, please make sure to like and subscribe. I will include a link to the book below. And if you do not necessarily want to buy the book, but you would like to contribute, I will also put in a link to my Kofi account. Thanks so much. Take care.